everybody. This is, in fact, our first Fireside chat in this room. We just redesigned it to, in fact, have a fire. So we have a fire.
It's a real one.
Yeah,
Yes.
you need a fire. We're still working on the furniture. So you're all sitting on chairs. The next time we do this, hopefully you're going to be sitting on some sofas as well. It's going to be a little more cozy. But today, that's what we decided to do because we just wanted to start using the room for this kind of intimate conversation. And we have a very special guest here today to kick off, in fact, this new space and the first Fireside chat. And let me introduce our guest today. And it's not every day that we get to hear from a true global business leader, someone whose strategic insights have not only helped shape an entire industry, but also redefined how the world engages with one of its most dynamic markets. Our guest today, Andrew Wu, is exactly that leader. A proud Schulich MBA graduate from the class of 1989, Andrew has spent the past 3 decades in key roles at some of the world's leading luxury, fashion, and entertainment companies. Andrew's extraordinary career trajectory has been one of vision and transformation. In the early 1980s, he was among the first wave of students to leave China after Deng Xiaoping's policy of opening up the country. Studying abroad was a life-changing experience for him, exposing him to Western culture, education, and ways of thinking. After completing his studies, he gained valuable experience working in Canada before making the bold decision to return to China in the early 1990s, just as the nation was stepping onto the global economic stage. He brought with him a unique global perspective, which was rare for its time, and today he seamlessly bridges the best of both worlds, shaping industries with his deep understanding of both East and West. As group president of LVMH Greater China, Andrew oversees more than 70 of the world's most iconic brands in one of the fastest growing and most competitive consumer landscapes. Forbes calls him LVMH's Mr. China, a fitting title for someone who has pioneered luxury retail in China, led the rise of global brands in the region, and shaped the evolution of Chinese consumer trends. But beyond business, he has also emerged as a key voice in promoting Chinese culture and was recently named by Bloomberg Businessweek as one of the top 50 most influential people in China. So from Maple Leaf Foods and Christian Dior to Sony Music and LVMH, Andrew's career is a master class in strategic vision, innovation, and leadership on a global scale. And today, we are fortunate to hear directly from him. So please join me in welcoming Andrew Wu. So I'm going to try and get him to engage in conversation a little bit with me for about 40 minutes. And then we're going to open it up to the audience for Q&A. I think we have about 20 minutes allocated for that. We might go there earlier. We see how it goes. But please, think about some questions. We certainly want to have time for that part. We're going to cover a few areas. We talk about career and leadership, global business and China's influence, innovation and the future of business, and perhaps some personal and career advice for our students as well. Now, Andrew, your career has spanned multiple industries, which suggests a broad skill set is required. When we look at the companies you've worked for, what you're doing now, let's talk about the skill set that you acquired over time that you think is required to succeed across these different industries. What are some leadership lessons you've learned during your journey? And if you think about what you're doing now, you're a leader in a $90 billion a year company 200,000 employees, a global company leading teams of diverse teams with global backgrounds. What is required to succeed in your current industry, and what have you learned over the last sort of 3 decades?
Well, thank you very much for a very nice introduction. I'm very flattered with a lot of things you've just said. First of all, let me just wish everybody a great Valentine's Day. Yeah. Happy Valentine's Day. It's a great day, not by choice, but by coincidence that I'm here. I'm very happy to be here. And also want to mention something else that is culturally linked. You know that this is the year of the snake.
Yeah.
I actually graduated in the year of snake 36 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So everything goes in cycles. So I believe in destiny. And to answer your question, luck is very important. We can never refuse luck. But luck can be cultivated when you are positive, you are open-minded. So I really don't have like a success formula to share with you, but I want to encourage everybody to be positive, even though we face a lot of negativity, a lot of issues, a lot of difficulties. So being positive is very important. Being open-minded is very important. Keep learning is very important. Connecting is very important. I walk through the passageway between 2 buildings, and I believe it's called Scan Connector. That's a very good name. I think we all need to connect. And I think see a lot of international students, see a lot of students from China, from Korea, from other countries. Connecting each other is very important, and I'm fortunate to have become a connector. Not necessarily by design, but as I said, I feel lucky and blessed that I was able to become a connector. You mentioned about my history of coming out of China, when China was different from what it is today. But my journey is a journey of learning, and I'm very thankful, very grateful to a Schulich education, among other things, that allowed me to be exposed to learn, even though I can't recall a specific example to share with you, but I think it's not about one thing. It's about the collective experience of being in Canada and learning at Schulich, and also, you know, what I have progressively done. Not by plan, but driven by what interests me. I hope that is something that you guys need to think about. What interests you is very important, which will drive you passionately to pursue what you are interested in, which may lead to something, but not strenuously try to just aim for success, but try to do what interests you. I don't know, I'm going away from maybe your question.
No, absolutely not. It's great. You don't even remember the 601?
I do. I remember the teamwork, and I remember how hard it was to process.
That's the pain.
It was those days that the computers were not as adequate, and you need to line up, and you need to, it was a different era.
Mm-hmm.
And today you are armed with easy computer access. I'm pretty sure your phones, your smartphones, and people have multiple screens, maybe probably in their dormitories. And now you have AI assistants to help you to do your homework much faster, I'm pretty sure, and challenging the professors probably how to judge your work, right? I think these things are driven by technology changes at lightning speed. So it's no longer probably a specific specific example to copy from, nothing to copy from. But the spirit remains the same, I think.
I mean, one thing you mentioned when we met just recently in Shanghai, actually, that stuck with me was how you arrived in Canada and you realize it's a very different place from the one you had left.
Mm-hmm.
People speak to each other differently. They relate to each other a bit differently. And you were fascinated by exploring this, that this is something you embraced as a learning opportunity.
Yeah.
And I do wonder sometimes today, with all the screens and the technology and so on, are we actually losing the ability to get away from a screen and focus on that element of, really immersing yourself into the local culture and take all these learnings away?
I have to say, because the cultural differences 40 years ago were much, much pronounced. So therefore, there's no doubt that you are, and I was entering a different culture. There's no doubt that you are being sort of impressed by everything new. There's no room to assume that I knew anything, right? So that's why I think it probably would be considered, in hindsight, a strong advantage. Today, the danger is people think they know each other. People assume too much. The world has probably become more and more similar in appearance. So therefore, it probably disadvantaged people from learning because you assume too much. The media probably tend to give you the impression that they know everything else in the world, except they only report the bad news. Yes, there's bad news. Yes, there are a lot of issues, but that's not everything. But I remember during COVID years, because don't forget, pre-COVID, I was traveling extremely frequently in and out of China globally. But COVID, partly by choice, I stayed in China for 3 years with no traveling overseas. But at the end of that, when I first started to resume international travel, because you only heard and saw what was going on in the rest of the world through media. I'm not talking about just Chinese media. I was always having access to international media as well. But still, you now sort of lived with only the impressions from the media. Suddenly, I realized I had a different view of the rest of the world. There was more fear, actually, because you only saw the bad side, right? Maybe the riots in the U.S. or the robbery somewhere else, the killing, whatever. Because media tend to crystallize certain things in a way, and social media didn't help either because it's an algorithm pushing echo chamber. So therefore, the realization was that when you were disconnected physically, only relied on media information, you developed a different view of the world. And that took time to be normalized. I started to travel again in 2023. Of course, now this is actually the second time, or third, fourth time in North America, second time in Toronto. The feeling is, quote unquote, back to normal because I no longer sort of lived with that sort of impression of the COVID years when we were separated. So this is important to come back to my point. I think because the world has become sort of so accessible through media, it probably disadvantaged people today from learning about other parts of the world. So be careful, be mindful of this. You need to see it. You cannot just rely on assumptions of what's going on in the rest of the world. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, okay. I think it's a really important point, and means students get off the screen sometimes and even just talk to each other as well more, right?
And it's good that you have international students coming in. You are recent. I remember something you just asked at the beginning, how many people had the first Canadian winter, and you have a few people who raise their hands. That's very good because you need the fresh blood like this to stimulate people who have been here for too long or only seeing things through media, right? So I think that people exchange is important.
Great. Now, global business, China's influence, big topic for I think all of us today. And China clearly has emerged as a trendsetter in many industries. Certainly fashion, technology. DeepSeek happened after we met in Shanghai. It's just
when we were in Shanghai together, there was this TikTok refugee phenomenon, remember?
Okay, no.
All arriving in Red Note.
Oh, yes, of course. That's right.
You discovered Red Note, which you did not know before.
No, that's right. That's right. And
so now DeepSeek.
Now DeepSeek, exactly. And talking about traveling, that's why it is important. I mean, it was fascinating to learn from you about the much more competitive social media landscape, even in China, right? Here we have sort of fairly stable players that have been around, and then you're telling me in China, well, there's all kinds of competitors that come and they're vying for particular spaces. So you can't really easily even learn about this without actually going to a place and talking to someone who lives in this space. But you also mentioned, the emergence of a cashless society, supermarkets are disappearing.
Physical supermarkets
are disappearing, and so on. We have robots now servicing hotels, but then you have also the luxury hotels with the high touch sort of services there. It was just remarkable, I think, for us to see and for me to also hear sort of trends that are going on where we see maybe some early signs here, but we're clearly not moving into this direction, at least not to this space. When you travel you travel the world, but between West and East, let's say North America and China, what are some of the things that you think we still don't really understand about the sort of Chinese economy, the marketplace there, the dynamism that's going on there?
I think China is such a big country, such a diverse, differentiated place that usually it deceives when people try to just summarize it and call it China. Canada, North America, where I lived for more than a decade and continue to visit in the last 3 decades, if I may, tend to be more not homogeneous, but tend to be more of the same. From West Coast to East Coast, people eat the same food. The supermarket look all the same all year round, almost killing seasonality. All good thanks to industrialization of agriculture, efficiency of food manufacturing supplies, etc. And the chains of Starbucks, KFC, McDonald's, all the same across the country. So in a way that it contributes to modernity. But because of that, people tend to think of China in similar fashion, thinking it's just one country, the same. But the reality of China is that, in fact, out of 1.4 billion people, even though advanced in many ways, impressing the rest of the world with shopping by mainland Chinese billionaires coming out of China, rich students now, I would say, by comparison, not necessarily the super, super rich, but relatively rich students coming out of China, affording education easily, and going back and forth. And in fact, all this tend to give you the impression that's all over China, forgetting that in China, probably, but even by government statistics, there's still 600 million people earning, just let's say a few hundred Canadian dollars a month, etc., etc. Still, there's a poor part of China. So China is all over the map. China is all over the map. So you could read the bad news, the backwardness, the problematic issues and all that, all of which true, but you could also be wrongly impressed by the other end of the spectrum, thinking that's China. So it's almost like an elephant and a blind man feeling the elephant. It could be like a snake, a tree, or whatever, but only when and if you open your eyes completely looking at the elephant, you realize none of which is not true, none of which represent the whole elephant, right? So I think the complication is that. So with that in mind, then we need to be aware of the most advanced part: technology, DeepSeek, Little Red Book, TikTok, etc., and the affluence of, let's say, 100 million people. Canada has, 30 million people?
Close to 40.
Close to 40. America has 300 million people, and Europe collectively, hundreds of millions. But when we are looking at so-called middle class, America today, 300 million people, I would say the real middle class, I would say maybe only 1/3.
Mm-hmm.
And Europe, the middle class collectively probably is about 100 million. So when you look at China, even though the percentage of the middle class, percentage of the population that is considered middle class, is probably just about 100 million. People would argue maybe up to 400 million, but that's by definition probably watering down the real sort of level of middle class consumption capability. But let's say 100 million people. So out of 1.4 billion people, 100 million people middle class, no argument. That's sizable already. So forget about the total population. That itself, don't forget, it's just the beginning. It's growing. It's not growing in a linear form, but it's growing nonetheless. So China is just at the beginning of a formidable middle class contributing. That's why we get all the good news as well, because it's very dynamic. And the average age is young. The average age in China for the middle class is probably represented by people in their maybe early 30s or no more than 40s, because China did not really develop until, in that context, in the consumer market context, until about 20 years ago, not 40 years ago, not when I was coming to Canada to study and work. It was only after I went back. So that is what contributes. Now, with that in mind, then we need to understand the speed of change now. The speed of change is driven by youth, young people. We have young people in this audience. So that's why it's very important to keep this promotion of connections. Because young people are step by step showing up in China in many ways. There was a time that the young people started to show up in consumption. That was not 40 years ago. That was not 30 years ago. That was about 20 years ago, when the first wave of young people showed up in consumption market. That was after 2000, turn of the century, because that was the first group of young people born since China opened up, since I actually came to Canada. So when I first went back, the young people that I waited for was that group to show up in consumption. People born after 1980. Today, that group is over 45. So it's no longer young. And the next wave was people born in 1990s. Now they are over 30. And people probably attending Schulich now are born, between 1995 and, let's say, 2000-ish, okay? So you see young people coming in. So with that, that's why the technology advancement exponentially explodes. Because the young people, better and better educated, more and more internationally exposed, contribute to a China that did not exist before. So the acceleration. So that's why technology and all that. In the last 4 weeks since we met in Shanghai, and by the way, every month I try to summarize what happened in the last 30 days. A lot of things happened. DeepSeek is one, but it's not just that. There's a Chinese animated film, Ne Zha, sequel, that is now becoming a #1 grossing animated film from China, and shooting into international sort of top-ranking films. But don't forget, it's mostly dependent on one single market. Unlike the U.S., that is inclusive of Canada market and international market to become top grossing films, right? So this is fascinating. Is it a perfect film? No, but is it the beginning of something new? Absolutely, yes. So you see all this, and this is done by people born since 1980, and a lot of young people contributing to it, getting sort of improvement on technology that they have seen. They even originally, making of that film, they farmed it to Hollywood production companies, and they were not happy with it, and they took it back and they made it work. So all the details I encourage you to discover. And there are Chinese robots performing in the CNY Eve gala. The gala itself is boring, actually, not watched by people in developed cities. But the robot dance catches everybody's attention because it's so good. Apparently, it's 12, I think it's considered 12 times faster than the Pentagon robotic dogs in terms of performance, agility, and all that. It probably has military implications, but it's not important. It's a reflection of technology advancement by China. The batteries, the new energy batteries, the drones. China now, I think, command probably more than or close to 70% of the global market share, right, in those fields. So the advancement is extraordinary, but behind all this is young people coming into the picture. And the consumer market in China, including the high-end consumer market that I'm engaged in,
Right.
People don't realize it's the average consumer in China is 15, 20 years younger than the average international consumer. And that
For the same product.
the average consumer, yes, same brand, it's young. China, even though on one hand it's true, you say, aging population. Yes, since 2022, China started to have negative, population growth, right? More people die than born, but the average living expectancy has also improved. China is now, the average life expectancy is 77 years old for 1.4 billion people. So that's extraordinary, right? Cities like Shanghai, 84. So that's good. But compared to, let's say, 80 years ago, China was below the world average, like 36 or something, right? So there's a lot of improvement for a large country. But young people driving all the changes, young people also accelerate the changes. So that tend to escape people's attention. Partly no fault for the audience watching from outside, because the Chinese politics represented by older people. Chinese official media, very clumsy, very bad. No comparison to the eloquent Western media. I'm not here to defend that, but I think we need to be mindful that there's a lot of China's going on within one China, and not everything is properly represented. So therefore, to be, I said earlier, curious, to be interested, to keep the people connections, allow us to know what's going on. So now, versus 40 years ago, 30 years ago, it's not a one-way learning. I think people need to learn from each other. I remember when I first came out of COVID to visit North America, I was looking at the cashless behavior that we already get so used to in China, and coming out and say, I still need my cash or wallet. But fast enough, there's Apple Pay. Even on TTC here or in New York in the metro, I can scan my phone and use my Apple Pay wallet and pay. So, you see the catching up. Now it's the reversing catching up. It's not the the China trying to catch up. I think it's crossing, both ways. And I was amazed in New York just last week, and there was a Blue Bottle Cafe. I didn't realize that they're now taking a product that is actually celebrating a historic project in Shanghai called Zhangyuan and named it Espresso on sale, in New York. I was quite impressed. I took a picture and sent it back to my friends in Shanghai, the Zhangyuan people, and say, hey, they are promoting you. They were very impressed as well. So you see all this thanks to people connections. So all this is very important. But yes, to answer your question in a long way, China, very advanced in many, many ways. Yes, now, because a lot of young people are at it, lightning speed, learning, absorbing, and adapting it to practices in a marketplace that is very vibrant,
Yes,
and very engaged. I think this is key. Post-COVID, we were talking about it. Here, people are still working from home, maybe 3 days out of 5 working from home. Over there, it's 7 days a week. People are anxious to go back to the office, and nobody's talking about working from home. Not to say good or bad. I'm just explaining why the speed of change continues to be fast, the other side of the globe, because people are really as hungry and eager. Yes, you will see business generations, the previous now middle-aged business generations in China, many of them maybe have now suffered because of the real estate debubbling, the deleveraging. And you also meet people from China who were not feeling as good or trying to migrate and all that, all of which true. But don't be deceived to think that's China and that's the whole China, because there's new generations coming in, there are new businesses coming in, one side going down, sunset, the other side going up, sunrise. So this is a dynamic marketplace where the new replaces the old, non-stop. So I think this is important. We need to keep learning, keep watching what's going on.
I mean, this new replacing your old and the ruthlessness with which
Incredible.
is really remarkable.
And the competitiveness, right?
Yes.
In China, everybody is trying to learn and get into everyone else's space. Here, Facebook is Facebook, just Facebook. And over there, WeChat becomes Alipay, Alipay becomes WeChat, TikTok becomes Pinduoduo. So everything is trying to get into everything else's space, right? I remember years ago, we thought Shein was coming into here, North America. We know that it was selling clothes, but I also understand Shein now, it become a platform. Doing what probably Taobao was doing in China. So this thing, the competitiveness, the fierce competition amongst Chinese companies are more than what you could imagine in other parts of the world. Starbucks is facing a lot of competition, by the way, in China. Not because people are not drinking coffee, it's because there are a lot of players. So if you're not careful, you're just listening to some biased analytics. You will say, China may be just nationalistic. This is American company. No. This is not the reason. China is nationalistic, yes, but not against international brands. And there are plenty of evidence of that. But at the same time, are international brands having an easy time in China? Absolutely not, because there's a lot more competition, not just from the supply side, but also from the demand side. The consumers are getting more and more sophisticated. They are more selective. They are more aware of what else going on in the world. The pricing differences are being exploited with the availability of cross-border e-commerce, all of which are contributing to probably driving China forward competitively. The competition, I think, in China probably is more than any other place, any other markets.
And I think it's really remarkable. You notice it immediately when you land, we touch down, right? There was for me and my colleague when we went last year, and this year we had another chance for a couple of days there. The cab ride from the airport to the hotel, you see 80% are electric vehicles on the road now. I would say maybe 70-80%. It's absolutely incredible. Half of them look like Teslas. They're non-Teslas. And the other half have their own unique designs, and they're brands you've never heard of. They seem to come and go sometimes as well.
Yes.
And this is the idea that a car company, a car manufacturer, would kind of emerge and maybe a couple of years later disappear again, and another one emerges, for us is just not imaginable. This is not how we think about it.
The trials and error, this sort of a phrase that we hear, trial and error. But in China, it's trial and error faster speed. See,
Right.
that's why they come and go. There was a time I don't know if you are aware. There was a time there's shared bicycles in China, all over the city, everywhere, and then within probably a couple of years, many of them died. Right, so it just came and went so quickly.
And it's not just on the, I noticed also the industrial product side, it's the services. I mean, what I found fascinating, and again, I encourage everyone, you have to go sometimes to places. You can't, but you have people here from Shanghai, for example, so talk to them, let them show you pictures. I mean, Starbucks was interesting you brought this up.
Yes.
When I was walking around the city, of course, I was walking around a beautiful part. It could be New York, could be anywhere really. But you see that the coffee places, they were very cool, very hip, very urban, but they still had some sort of distinct Chinese linkage to tradition, maybe this amazing history and so on. And so they were not Starbucks. They were, you know,
and also Chinese brands. People always, just who are just theoretical and say, where are the Chinese brands? Well, Chinese brands don't shout Chinese. They don't even sometimes have a Chinese name. For instance, in Shanghai, there's a huge chain called Manna. That's not Chinese, but that's Chinese. That's very Chinese. It was born and created in Shanghai near my office, and suddenly became one of the top chains in China. And it's called Manna with no Chinese name. So all this is what's going on. It's sort of fused, sort of modernized the China that is coming out and learning to impress the world in ways that are probably not traditional Chinese. There are traditional Chinese, but not everything Chinese is labeled Chinese.
Fantastic. We only have a couple of minutes before we go and take some questions from the students. We had a little bit of a conversation over lunch about this already, where, I asked you, I mean, you are essentially also Mr. Brand. You have 70 iconic brands. You have stores you have to manage there where, you need to connect to consumers. We talked a little bit about how social media is becoming is for you, it's a challenge. You learn to figure out, how do I use this? How is it transforming how I can connect consumers, my brand to consumers? Maybe we can talk just a little bit about that. How even for probably one of the most iconic leaders, luxury leaders in the world, this is still something you constantly have to figure out and learn how to use and engage with social media. And is there anything else that you see maybe a little further out that might become the next big disruption of your business in particular, or maybe economic disruption more generally?
Well, first of all, it's not me. It's a collective sort of approach. Our group with so many brands that sort of look at China and deal with China and learn from China and adapt to China. So it's not one person. It's not a top-down thing. It's really sort of not bottom-up, but certainly a multiple channel engagement, contact points. The point I want to make is in the context of Canada's orientation and what maybe I personally feel that is very important to some industry, not all. Canada has a tendency of a B2B business because it's a resource-driven country, and many businesses are B2B business. What I represent, what I have experienced in the last 30 plus years in China is a B2C business. And the brand business, consumer brands business, tend to be B2C. Even more so in Asia than North America and then Europe, for argument's sake. Because the gradual development of the B2C business in developed countries started with wholesale partners, department stores, etc., etc. And that's not how it developed in China or to a larger extent in Asia. Because the brands went directly, what they called B2C, right? Directly. You open your own stores, you manage your own stores. So that allows you a direct contact with the consumer, which Canada, the business orientation of Canadian business is probably not very good at. Not because of any other reason, because there's no necessity. Because the structure here is so B to B to B to C. You have sort of, a distribution sort of structure that allows you not to think about this, right? So that was one point I want to make. The second point I want to make is, I was actually yesterday, because it was the day before, snow, so I stayed downtown and I looked at the subway. For many years I didn't, but I looked and I suddenly realized there's no advertising anymore, or empty spaces in the train. And I couldn't help but think about and say, this is really sort of a sad picture of what it has become, right? Because there used to be a lot. In Japan, in Tokyo, I rode the subway. You can still see metro advertising because the density of the population. Canada, with lack of density of population, even though Toronto is already the best, but still a country is not densely populated. So when this B2C is already weak, and advertising used to be broadcasting, and today advertising is social media, interactive engagement. And that explains why this broadcasting thing is not dead, but certainly diminished. So with all this, now come back to answer your question. So the learning from a B2C-oriented industry in a B2C environment like China and Asia, thanks to the social media, is the fact that it's not a choice. You need to engage. It's not a few wise men thinking that they have found the formula. No, it's because on a daily basis, the interaction draws you into this game, right? You need to engage. If you don't, you're dead.
Yes.
Fashion.
You mentioned there's things happening on social media.
Things happening drag you there. It's not your choice.
Exactly. You mentioned it.
So it's because the top European brands tend to say, my image, my whatever. It's an imposition, right? I would say the top fashion houses still impose because you would not know what will be fashionable next year. Let me tell you what will be fashionable because you don't know what you would get. It's not a functional consumption. It's an inspirational consumption. It comes from what you don't know, but you are inspired. But it doesn't mean that it's guaranteed, right? You could be inspired and not inspired. So success and failure is not necessarily from one side. It's an engagement. This engagement, the practice of this engagement, makes you perfect. It's not a top-minded person imposing everything as if you are the wise man. No, it's success and failure, right? So it's keep engaged. Fashion is out of fashion. There's a saying, because it keeps changing. So change is good, but you will see success, you will see failure, but keep engaging. So the nature of the industry, the nature of the marketplace, the nature of industry, all together, and thanks to new tools, it's not a choice, but it becomes part of the ecosystem engagement. Social media is that. Now, gradually, as you keep in the game, you learn about playing the game. So therefore, the good are the ones who are good at it. And if you're not good, you'll be immediately notified by the market, and consumer will abandon you, right? So all this keeps this game going on a very lively pace, right? Engagement, B2C engagement. And social media is B2C engagement. When you think about e-commerce, same. E-commerce from day one is B2C. I'm talking about e-retail. I'm not talking about yellow pager engagement of wholesalers. So all this is new tool, but it's an orientation that drives the new economy. You think about it, game playing, it's B2C, right? E-retail, B2C. And what kills the physical supermarket in China is because of e-commerce, more convenient, faster, etc., right? And of course, thanks to the availability of labor force doing quick deliveries in cities, right? And say, argue and say, okay, maybe that's because China has cheap labor. But that cheap labor used to be going into the factories or doing foot massage. Now they don't want to do this. They want to do this quick delivery. But then you will argue and say, oh, what if they don't want to do this anymore? Well, wait, there's robots coming. Okay, there's already robotic sort of vehicles being tested on highways in China. Sometimes you see videos of that. It's in an infantile stage, but it's getting safer and safer. And so therefore, I think this sort of future is not going to be a linear way of change based on what we know, but it's coming up, because there's a need. So with all that, then we'll say, okay, this B2C engagement, people-to-people engagement is the source of innovation. It's actually driving innovation because there's a need. People will get older. China has already started to enter this aging society phenomenon. But how is it going to work? Is it going to follow Canada or European countries and put all the old people in a nursing home? Or is it going to be integrated with younger generations? So the learning never stops. So it's not going to go a linear fashion. That's what's so fascinating. So this cross-learning, I think Canada and the rest of the world, and Canada and China, needs to be nurtured, because the distance makes this place slower. Mm-hmm. The lack of population concentration make this place more space for thinking, maybe. But keep watching, keep engaged. And maybe this is, we were talking about this is an incubator of ideas. Because as we go in the direction of more and more the same, people are looking for something unique and different and unique things can only be generated and incubated in different places. And Canada could be that different place,
Yeah, but a place also that attracts people from all different places around the world, and then a mixture emerges perhaps that generates this kind of innovation and creativity.
Yeah,
that's what you hope for. Amazing. I think we want to move on to some questions.
Okay.
From the audience. We have a few minutes left, so let's go ahead.
Hello. Firstly, thank you so much for such an amazing fireside chat. I had to write down my question. So No, China's diversity and rapid transformation make it a fascinating place to learn from. And being at Schulich, we benefit from international environment and conversations with inspiring alumni like you. Beyond the classroom and peer discussions, what are the most effective ways for aspiring global leaders such as ourselves to continue deepening our understanding of China, its economy, culture, and business landscape, so we can engage meaningfully as future leaders?
I think Schulich has a program with Chinese university.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, we have a 1+1 MBA, but that's one direction actually.
Yes. Which direction?
But we have exchange, of course. So our students, all the MBA students here, could do an exchange with Chinese schools.
With that, I would encourage sort of promotion of that kind of exchange, even though you are studying at Schulich. Since Schulich has already a program like this, that kind of program facilitates physical contact, right? Not just reading about China, not just watching China from Canadian or American television, but to be physically in contact with China, however brief, a few weeks or whatever, could be of interest. But obviously you need to have a purpose. So I think there are already areas because China is too complicated to be understood in one go, right? Even I know there are Chinese people in this audience, me included. I cannot claim I know everything about China. I can only tell you that I keep learning about China, even when I'm working in China for already 30 plus years, I keep learning. So therefore, you need to probably stay humble, but try to figure out a subject of interest, right? Is it social media that you're interested in? Is it a certain field that you want to figure out a connection with Canada? For instance, food. Okay, Canada, abundant with food supplies, agricultural development, sustainable agriculture, advanced maybe agricultural technology, superior quality of food offerings. China were in a hurry. China was in a hurry to develop in the 80s and 90s. China now has developed a certain scale. China is looking for quality now, sustainability now. Is there something that there's a need and there's a sort of a match, there's a future that could be created, things like this. So I think we need to look at a lot of things. And I mentioned earlier about ideas being incubated, yet Canada itself is not big enough a market. Plenty of examples of Canadian incubated original things that went on to become big. Lululemon, for instance, okay, right? Tim Horton, for argument's sake. So even though it's not unique, but people are not looking for things that are totally original. People are looking for something that is better than others or different from others. So we are in this space. So connection with China is already there, but can you take advantage of it? Would it be improved, enlarged? If it's a window, could you see through that window what you're looking for? Window itself is meaningless unless you see through the window or you open the window, right? So I think that's my thought.
Yep, the lady behind, the one who just...
First of all, I just want to say, 下午好，四位好，苏立克. That was a great conversation you had with the dean. And I guess my question is, as I was browsing through the financial report of LV from last year, I noticed that there's a very big growth in the cosmetic and perfume sector. And market-wise, we see exceptional growth in Japan, even though there's like a decline in the Asian market overall. And that paired with the fact that you mentioned earlier about how the consumers in China are getting younger and younger. I guess my question is, like, how would LV position itself and market itself in Asia, according to like all of the trends I mentioned earlier?
You asked a question specific to a brand in LVMH. LVMH has 70 plus brands. You mentioned one brand.
Oh, I meant like the entire.
Sorry. That's even a bigger question. So therefore, you are asking questions about our group's businesses, which I usually don't want to answer. Because I think it's understandable people have that kind of questions. I'm not here to answer questions analytically about our performances or finances or strategies at all. But I could share with you what I think of the marketplace, right? People tend to look at, because you probably get information from the media, because you're interested in industry, but people are looking at it year on year, right? But forgetting that the world doesn't go linear like this, right? But you need to think about where China and Asia came from, where that industry was. That industry did not exist in the 1970s. It became an industry probably in late 70s and 80s when the formulation of some groups started to emerge. Only in the 80s and 90s, okay? Not before, okay? Now, in that space, people tend to forget even European brands created in Europe. It was the American middle class that propelled the growth of the industry. The consumers propelled them, okay? And then the Japanese consumers further propelled it to grow. And then the Chinese consumers entered. But the Chinese consumers did not enter until about 15, 20 years ago, entered, to make this whole thing huge. Make this whole thing huge. You may not know that the COVID years actually peaked, unprecedented industry at like triple-digit growth for some brands between 2019 and 2021. And then adjusted 2023, 2024, because people started to resume travel. So the industry consumption by Asian consumers respread to the rest of the world. Yet people analytically only look at, okay, what happened in Japan, what happened in China, forgetting this whole industry's consumption is by people originating from different continents, but everywhere else. I was in Yorkdale yesterday, and I saw, interesting. They're extending the mall and more luxury brands. And guess what? They didn't do it for residents of Toronto. They did it for Asian populations entering Toronto. Am I right or wrong?
That is true.
You see? So therefore, when you are interested in analytics, don't be deceived by superficial analytics. You say, yes, but, okay, the fundamentals have not changed because the whole brand consumption movement pushed very, very strongly by Japanese consumers, rest of Asia, and with China entering the space, right? But it's not a linear growth because the world economy at this moment is complicated, right? So I would say that's one categorical answer I want to give you. Second thing is beauty as an industry, because you mentioned about beauty, right? Beauty as an industry sort of sits in between fast-moving consumer goods and so-called luxury industry. Sits in between. When we think of luxury industry, because I asked you think you're impressed by one brand, right? Because we tend to think of a few top fashion and leather goods brands, thinking that's the whole industry. But I can tell you, that's not how you define the industry, okay? Because it leads you to think that's the industry, but yet you jump to beauty already, you see? So this is actually an industry that is very difficult to define and sometimes wrongly grouped together, you would argue, because it's all over the map, right? All over the map. So when you think about beauty, you see now it's a beauty discussion now. You look at the beauty industry, Well, first of all, beauty is middle-class, affordable consumption. In North America, it's available in drugstores and department stores and Sephora and online, Amazon, whatever, right? None of which would be really, in a narrow sense of discussion, very, very high-end. It's really, everywhere, right? And then the world is such that, don't forget, beauty. You have mass-market beauty brands. You have premium brands, okay? And then you would consider, okay, upper-level premium. But don't forget, the world is such that you have Europeans, Americans, Japanese, Korean brands, very big, and Chinese brands rising. So it's a space that is actually forever advancing, but competitive, extremely competitive. So when people are too narrow, looking at just a few and say, shrinking, rising, forgetting the market is growing. The market is growing, just competitive. I was thinking of something else this morning when I was writing something else about a company called GE, which invented MBA, I think, or business training.
Yep, General Electric.
General Electric, right? Course. At one point, probably this was the biggest celebrated, successful company. Where is it now? I think it's barely surviving. I don't know the details. The reason I tell you this, if you get fixated, thinking that it's unchangeable, you're just looking at this, you could be wrong. You need to have a broader picture to look at the consumers, broader picture looking at the consumption, broader picture of looking at the beauty industry, broader picture of looking at competition, and not just narrowly looking at a few companies, are they rising or falling, to just conclude that the industry is this or that way. Right?
Is it easier today than it used to be for new brands to enter, for example?
Depends. I think nothing is easy. I think big companies tend to get bigger, but of course, if you're complacent, you could also be dead, like what we just mentioned, right? So I think it's a dynamic industry. It's a young industry. It's an industry without borders. You would think we artificially give it a border. Is iPhone part of high-end brand?
Mm-hmm.
I ask you a question. You will say, but where did it come from? When did it emerge? Probably 20 years ago, 2004. iTunes, etc., right? And then they open iStores, Apple stores, and it becomes retail. That's also new, but we take it for granted. We say, this is almost like forever there. No, it's not forever there. It's new. It went into retail new. Before that, it was probably like mini phones, a wholesale business, right? So things change, every industry change, and consumers change because young generations push the change. Young people today represent today, but tomorrow's young people may push us forward in different directions, right? And their tastes will change. European brands, fashion brands now gone American street style. Is that French or Italian, or is it just international? Chinese brands have emerged, but are they labeled Chinese, or are they also adopting American street style? I'm asking you a question, but actually I have the answer. You probably have the answer as well, because they don't shout Qing Dynasty. They look American street style. So I think all this we need to understand, because we're talking about internationalization, whether we like it or not. It is happening. It has happened and has influenced a lot of things. Korean brands, Korean pop art, K-pop, huge. But is it shouting Korean history? I'm afraid not. But it upgraded American street style, make it more polished. And now back influencing America probably and Europe, generating a big following, right?
Yeah. because I have young kids, there's apparently a show where they're bringing in the people that created K-pop stars.
Yes.
And are importing it into the US now to create American versions.
And they have a lot of American musicians working behind the scene to generate K-pop.
Okay, we have one more. We have time for one more question. Okay, I think right here. Yeah. Okay.
So first of all, I really appreciate for your share, and I really learned a lot from your horizon. And I have a question, kind of continues to the last one, but it's more about your position. So I know that LVMH has a lot of brands, as you mentioned, 70 plus, and then there are a lot of areas: perfume, cosmetics, fashion, luxury, wine, watches, extra. And I know each brands are quite separated, like maybe one or two big brands are apart for one floor for the backstage office. And then like each brand, they are quite separated, and each departments, they are quite separated. And I'm wondering how you manage these brands, like how you deal with these plenty of information, and how you deal with to connect with APAC Center, Worldwide Center for different plan schedules. I was really wondering how the top management working.
It doesn't work that way you imagined. It's not a top-down because within the group it's as competitive as within the marketplace. So we don't manage it top-down and dictate and say, oh, you make bags, oh, you make shoes. No, this is an internally competitive environment as well. As you said, individually, the brands manage themselves. The group has a lot of contribution, obviously, to group together, synergize, human resource, a market intelligence and all that, but not dictating to the brands because to be honest, it's not a rational industry. When you think about it, fashion is entertainment. Just like Hollywood movies. How do they manage all the movies? You ask yourself. For a music company, how do they manage producing all the songs? Do they have a big boss and say, you should be romantic, you should be rapping? No, this is not how it goes, right? It's people working in the industry, doing their best, interacting with the consumers, and doing more or less the same, but being unique. And it's not mutually exclusive. It's not like, oh, you drink this and you don't drink that, right? Do you notice that most of them are in the same mall, next to each other, not afraid of being, oh, I'm going to lose my customer to you, but I need to be next to you? Why? Because it's entertainment. It's not mutually exclusive. The more high-end you go, the less it's a necessity, right? It's not a necessity. So it's really a cultural inspiration. It has more culture in it than material, right? You're not going there to feel, oh, this is $10 or $20, right? The emotional value is more than the physical product. So engagement, cultural engagement. So that's why I think interaction is very important. That's why you see, you project. We talk about a Chinese company, Pop Mart, a Chinese company that is now coming to North America, which I admire a lot. And that's fascinating because they're making things to be loaded with your emotions because it's not a live object, yet you project your own feelings onto this not live object and make it alive, right? That's fascinating. And that's the new China that you need to pay attention to. It's not just making things cheap. Yes, they are making things cheap, but it's also, you see, it's also learning about, the next level. So you asked me about what do I expect to see. Right. I don't know. Every day I'm learning, you see. So I enjoy my work. Part of my work is every day, every month, I'll take a couple of days to think about what happened in the last 30 days. Can I summarize it and share with you? And I do that partly because I do it for my HQ colleagues, the boss, partly because my colleagues in China, they love reading it, even though they are living through this. But when I crystallize this, give them a view, and they say, this is interesting, even though I know the facts, but I didn't think about this that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or people who are reading the news, Financial Times, New York Times, etc., CNN, but I explain in historic context, factually, so therefore they get something more, etc. So with that, I would say I don't predict the future, but I try to collect the present and try to recall the past. So therefore, maybe the future will be clearer, but not conclusive.
Mm-hmm.
And every month, I'm trying to always be careful and say, I don't want to say 100%, because I don't know 100%. Nobody knows 100%. Whoever this says 100%, most likely wrong. So therefore, I'm being cautious and say, this is what I read, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. But I want maybe to hint where we are going, right? But I have a time and opportunity to correct myself next month if it's not the case. I don't know. I actually have no answer. But I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to the next thing that will help me to understand it better.
Right. I don't think there could be a better lesson actually for everybody in this room here. And I've seen these reports Andrew creates, these sort of monthly summaries. They're really incredible. They give a snapshot that you don't get here, by the way. If you're here in Canada, you can't.
I'm not allowed to publish this. Sorry.
Because I'm not going to share right now. But it's clear your point about I'm taking this in as much as I can, then and think about it in order to see can I project a bit into the future, always humble, always knowing that things might change and I might have to adjust. But really just taking this time to say, I need to analyze it, I need to think about what I'm seeing and reading here, not assuming you know exactly what's going to happen. I think it's a great lesson for our students as well. You got to take your time to first analyze before you jump to any kind of conclusion or recommendation, which is very tempting for many students when they're given a challenge, right? A case or a business problem, solve it for me, and I give you the answer. It's very difficult. And
especially now we have AI assist.
Yes. I just punch it into and give me the answer. Exactly. I can skip all of it. You can't. You can't skip the analysis part and really thinking hard about what it is you're seeing before you come up with any kind of recommendations. Okay, I don't know how we're doing time-wise, but I think we're pretty much out of time. We want to also give everybody a little bit of time, maybe have a chance to connect with Andrew here in this room for a couple of minutes. So thank you so much. What a superstar, Andrew Wu, Mr. China. Thank you so much.